Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's really great to have my first presentation in Brisbane. I've been here in Brisbane for 10 years now, and this is the first time that I'm actually talking about my profession. So welcome. Thank you, and thank you, ThoughtWorks. James and Lynn also, where are you? Thank you. So I'll just start, if I can, with a little bit of an agenda. So first, a welcome to everybody, as I said. Thank you for coming. And a little bit about myself, an introduction, then a little bit of background about what is my work experience and what are the industries that I've worked in general in IT, what is my experience in integration, the test approach that I've used, and the behavior specifications and practices for testing, and how do we use them in integration domain. So at any time, at any point, if you have any questions or if I'm going too fast, please let me know. I'm happy to stop. So first of all, the introduction. I'm Monica Lopez Gutierrez, as I said. I was born and raised in Mexico, in a city called Jalapa, which is in the coast, in the Gulf of Mexico. My background is in IT. I studied computer science engineer. And then I did a master's in IT administration. Before moving to Australia, I started practicing software analysis and a little bit of development and testing practices. It was when agile practices were starting to ramp up around 2000, 2003. And most of the agile approaches that we've seen at that point in software development cycles were about pair programming. Scrum was really like baby steps, just picking up. And that's basically when I started working in IT. My first job was in my university in the technology in Vice Rectory. And there we started developing different online systems for registration, for payroll. And my work there was in between an analyst, an engineer, and a test analyst or test manager. After that, we started implementing quality assurance and picking up with CMMI practices. So that's a little bit about my background. This is more about testing approach and the test pyramid. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this type of picture. So any thoughts or questions? Yep, so let's start here.
Familiar with this.
Familiar? Any questions or any?
The green can be the blue.
Exactly.
The blue.
The blue one.
Yeah.
Has anyone had any experience around unit or component testing being sufficient? It's never sufficient. It's never enough. Integration. What are your thoughts about integration testing? What it should be or should not be done? And end-to-end. What is the common terminology for end-to-end practices, end-to-end testing? Is it only UI? Is it business process driven? Is it all back-end system integration until we get a paycheck, until we get a letter, until we just get a UI description on a web screen? So basically, we can get different approaches and scope and targets around our test pyramid. It's basically how we want to do things and what we're defining as part of our behavior on an application, on a business process, or if we take it down to a level of unit or component, is what that component should be doing or should not be doing to provide a business function or a service. And that's the focus that we approach in integration. And the best thing around unit or component testing is that you work with developers as well as analysts to design for the common good. What I mean by that is that everybody is in tune with what the business wants, what our system needs, what our infrastructure allows, and also what our systems across the organization are allowing us to do and what we need to do from a legislative or compliance perspective for those of us that work in financial or in very specific technical industries. The automated testing and the test suites and the way we scope our testing can be seen as having the maximum of coverage or approach in the bottom layer. Then we have the integration layer, which it should have probably around 80% of our tests, which we can prove that we can suffice the coverage of our integration service contracts. So by service contract, I mean anyone can call a service and anyone can use it with the same logic for everyone, the same business representation, and the same expected results. In that way, you can standardize how is it behaved, how is operated, how can you troubleshoot, and how can you monitor. In that way, you can just expose and sell your service with a specific set of requirements and tests, regardless of who is using it, and how are you offering that service across your different systems. For the manual, ad hoc, and exploratory testing where appropriate, by that I mean that it's not necessarily to always test manually. It's not necessarily to always have the extreme possibilities and the extreme cases automated as well, but having a kind of a gut feeling about, you know, where your risk areas are, you know where your development team and your design is more flaky because you are involved from the design all the way to the development, deployment, and even the DevOps cycle. And some of us, we are also in the teams that actually operate or support that in production environments. So if we produce dodgy code and we produce dodgy tests, we are going to suffer the consequences. And that can help us to develop better ethics at coverage, to actually know better our systems and know what are the edge cases that are probably edge cases for a test analyst, but in a production environment or business case, we actually have a lot of incidents around certain scenarios. Certain scenarios that can cause not only very small changes, but heavy hours of FTEs in operations or in different business teams that actually have to manually key thousands of reports or thousands of transactions, thousands of submit screens or scanning documents, when you can limit that for a simple test case that can be automated, or you have a high risk on that scenario that if it's not going to be automated, you know that you have to run it manually or pass it through the different business units to test it. Okay, so that one. By integration, my current work is in Sunsuper. My first job in Australia was in Flight Centre. After that, I went to Spark and Energex and work in different systems. I worked not only in integration for the last 5-6 years, but also worked on GDS systems and also online systems, UI applications from a desktop perspective, data warehouse, data migration, correspondence, and a lot of scripting, basically. It's data in and data out, and it's a lot of comparison of results, a lot of business rules, and things that can be easily automated. In integration, the benefit of that is that you need a lot of technical specifications, because that allows you to maintain specific formatting in your tests, specific standards and governance, and also specific error handlers that helps the organization in identify the issues, who can you escalate it to, and how do you fix them. So from an integration perspective, the architecture, we can see it as an entire enterprise encompassing all its information systems and the architecture of a specific domain within the enterprise. In both cases refers to supports to service orientation, and in the SOA aspect, in the SOA architecture, is basically to support and backfill that process of that thinking of having a repeatable, self-contained, and self-contained and design-based approach on a business process with different components. It's very much a black box where you know what is going to be an input, what is going to be the output. You don't necessarily need to think about what it goes inside. But the good thing about that is that because you're involved in the design, you're involved in the requirements, you're involved in the meetings with different teams, with infrastructure, with environments, with operations, you know how it should behave and how it shouldn't behave. That's why you have a strong governance. By governance, you have a service contract that everybody must adhere. Everybody has to play by the rules. And if you are not expected something as an input, then you can easily reject it and put the reasons why and escalate it to the separate team. So some examples of implementations and integration, we have the services, we have the APIs, the HTTP services, some of the gateway systems as well, provider or third-party services, industry standards like SuperStream around the superannuation industry. So for those of us that there are a couple of people here that work with me in Sunsuper, we are heavily regulated by the ATO, and we also have to align to technological or technical standards and logging and monitoring as well. And now we are moving into a very heavily cloud integration approach, which is and I don't know if it's in Australia or is it just Brisbane or is it in a global aspect. I haven't seen a lot of cloud strategies in testing around security, around load, around environments and DevOps. But what about development? Do we have practices for testing and development? Do we have an environment to play around without breaking third parties, without breaking our system integrated environments before going to an acceptance or UAT environment? I haven't seen one that is successfully implemented. So it's something to think about in our future and something to think about in our different industries and practices. What are the examples and what are the best practices that you've seen? How can we take them to the next level? So some of the test approach that we've taken in our teams, it's around behavior-driven development, using functional and non-functional requirements. This is very much standard across whatever you're going to provide as a team. If you're part not only of the solution but the implementation and the operation, you need to think about those things. So what it should be done and what should not be done from a requirements perspective, from a system perspective, UI, also from security, performance and load, monitoring and logging. You need a component layers are mainly around service contract. Should adhere to a specific XSD validation contract. Should align to a specific XML format. Should align to a specific REST format. Should align to specific validations based on canonical interfaces, or simply just throw whatever you want and I'll reject it if I don't like it without any more explanation. It's up to your teams, up to us to develop it and think about how we're going to integrate, but it's easily for everybody to read a documentation. That it can be very extensive or it can be as easy as a wiki page with a link to a WSDL, with a link to an XSD, and just have the specification there for what it means, and just a repository where you have a source, you have different sources in your systems, you have a glossary where you have a reference to what do I mean by a specific data element and where do I find it? Do I find it in multiple systems? Do I need to test everywhere, or am I trusting that whoever is managing the systems or however I'm getting that data, as a provider system, I'm trusting that has been done and I'm just doing the integration component of it. And that's why it's very important, the pyramid that we talked about earlier around unit and component testing, where you have that trust, that layer of trust that you test your bit and you are trusting that the other team or the other application or the other service is already doing what they're supposed to do. So by the time you're developing based on contracts and mocking your services so that you can switch on to the ready state. Now I'm ready to integrate with the next component. Now I'm ready to integrate with the next system. I'm ready to integrate with a store procedure here and a store procedure there. I'm ready to integrate with multiple services from third parties, from ATO, from gateways, from clearinghouses. From an end-to-end and user interface perspective, it's easier when you have tested all of the ones below in the component and unit tested, the integration layer around contracts, business validations, and you're trusting that your store procedures, your integration with the backend is working, the other teams or the application and business processes can be tested confidently that they don't need to deal with 400 errors, 500 errors, bad gateway errors, cannot read a file, cannot put a file, cannot send an email, cannot receive an alert, cannot track things that went wrong in my environment. When we write around behaviors where appropriate, we know that the functionality is there, the non-functionals are there, and we are planning to cater for them. And we have positive and negative scenarios. By that I mean critical paths. 100% of your critical paths is impossible, but you always try to achieve your 75 to 80% of critical paths. Go to your business and assess what are the main scenarios around your industry, around your business processes, your units, your systems. Error handler, what is the most common thing in production that goes wrong? What is the most common thing when you're trying to connect to a third party? What is the most common thing that you're trying to test or you're trying to send something through a security layer? And just always automation as a preference, even if it's your 20% or your 60%. If you can do the 80% would be great. It's very difficult to keep up with automation, but if you have at least a certainty that your service contract is automated in your tests, that your error handler is a standard across your layer of services. It can be from web services to enterprise services, messaging services. You have win half of the battle, especially when you're going to do operation as well. If you're doing operation and something happens, you're going to be on call sometime. You're going to have to deal with providers. You're going to have to deal with infrastructure. You'll have to go through thousands of logs and try to find a needle in a haystack. It's easier to have a catalog of errors and error codes that tell you what happened and what to do under those circumstances, and what is the catalog of applications that will be impacted if that doesn't work, and who is impacted from the business. Is it a critical process? Is it stopping operations, or is it just stopping one person using a screen? So why to design this, develop and implement correct business behaviors? Because it's easier, as I said, just to maintain and operate, but also to know what we're doing and why are we doing it, to actually get to know our business and get to know our processes and deliver value with it. A business behavior would be centric around a business value. As our user stories, most of us who are involved in agile practices, basically you have your backlog based on features and user stories. You add a value, you score, you get your product owners or your technology SMEs or your business SMEs to assess the solution or your scenarios or your critical delivery. When you assess and implement the correct solution, it's easier to manage expectations, but also to deliver higher quality in less amount of time, because you clear all the doubts and all the questions from the beginning with the design, involving everyone that needs to be there. An analyst, an SME, a developer, possibly a DBA, and a tester, of course, and an automated tester. Because everybody is on the same page and are expected the same thing. And your developer, if you have an architect to work with, you go through discussions with the architects and the infrastructure people to verify if that's possible and how it should work or how it shouldn't work according to your enterprise needs. because we might see only the first step of the process where the goal is going all the way. And it can be as fast as a year, or it's actually 3 months ahead, so we need to start looking ahead. And integration is a domain where we are heavily interacting with different technology teams. In my experience, I work I work a lot, collaborating a lot with architects and with developers. Why? To enable testing at the appropriate layer, to actually target the right test at the right time in the right environment. Do we need to test unit tests or do any integration tests very specific to data types, service contracts, all types of possible error handlers in a UAT environment or in acceptance environment or post-production environment? We don't. You can do it from a unit environment. We can do it through a seat environment or through a system environment. When we know that that code is ready, that can be deployed using continuous integration into a higher environment. That means that if you are in a test environment which is shared across different teams, different applications, and you're running batch jobs that are expected in 1 or 2 days to produce something, you are actually not interrupting the work of other teams or other development cycles. Most of our organizations are working in parallel projects. That means everybody has a need of data at that point in time. So one of our challenges is data integrity, especially around automation. How do we test without breaking someone else's tests when we are sharing environments, when we are sharing databases, when we are sharing service accounts, when we are sharing Active Directory profiles, roles, testing not only functionality from a UI, from a login-based application, but we are also testing on the back end that the information is correct. When we are testing data migration, when we are testing batch jobs, everybody is sharing the same data. When you cut down all those risks, you reduce your cost and you get more effective in delivery cycles, because you can fix sooner rather than later, and it's easier to test without the help of coordinating with 2 or 3 or 4 other teams to make sure that nobody touches your test member, nobody touches your business process, or nobody deploys something without your permission because you are just about to submit a check or just about to submit a different version of your service. And another thing is that with those changes in a timely manner and where required, which is my next bullet point, it's around deliver and test fast enough, but in the appropriate environment is the best way to actually maintain your code changes in one version. Once you're ready to have a set of workable or functional version of your code or of your service, it's easier to manage with your set of tests. It would be ideal that any developer can have those unit or component tests push into a Team City build, continuous integration build, run them in the unit environment. If it's a local PC, run them locally, have their mock tests, run them before they check in the code in TFS or whatever source control system we have, and then deploy it into a unit environment. Check the build, at least run that the unit tests are good, produce a report and say, hey, testers, here you go. Are you happy for us to deploy it? Oh, good. It goes instantly to an integration environment. Runs everything again. Smokes, all passing, everybody's connecting. Oh, no, I forgot to get permissions for a database. I need to call infrastructure to create profiles for new service accounts, for new teams, new business units. How long does it take to create that? Can we mock that? Do we care about it when we're doing unit tests? Not really, but we can prepare for it. We know what is expected. We have requirements. What we think about in those requirements, we think about the design. We have thought about it already with our other teams in infrastructure. We have thought about with other teams in security and compliance. So probably this sounds a little bit high level, but when we're delivering very tight deadlines or with a lot of new technology and you have multiple teams working on a same big project, but different changes across the line, it always gets very risky if you haven't even tested once everybody together in the same play field. When we work together in a same test environment, and at the end, someone is going to break the integration service layer, the web service that everybody uses it. Integration is always a team that gets to blame. It's not fair, but it's reality, because we use those services. We are testing those services, and everybody plays with those services. That's why it's important to have the correct coverage at the right time, so that when you're sharing the environment, we minimize the impact and the risk of something breaking. And we can test with our application owners or other teams to actually say, hey, guys, my module is ready. Are you happy for me to deploy it so you can test it? I'll give you 2 days. Can you run a few tests? Make sure that you can connect, that you can go back and forth. Is there any issue? Just let me know. We coordinate with the other teams and have that ready. Oh, sorry, I'll go back. And why I'm talking about this? Because behavior-driven development is based on scenarios and process requirements, but also DevOps is a process. And governance is full of processes, documented processes. Documentation is not only about thick books or thick manuals. It can be wikis. It can be SharePoint links. It can be data spreadsheets. As long as we don't know what we're doing, how are we doing it, and someone else can pick it up and learn it, it's easier for everybody to learn when you are onboarding new team members or getting other teams to use your applications or your services. And you can even write some behaviors around your support processes as well. Because if you are delegating levels of support, you have permissions around it. You would have different roles and responsibilities. And that would be also one of your expected results or outcomes. It's part of your deliverables. And that's what I'm talking about, transition to support and operations. Once we deliver as an integration to a higher environment, which means we've ticked the box of all my testing is completed, we're ready to roll, let's get started before going to production. We have 3 weeks or 2 weeks or 1 week to get the business ready. So you get your project lead, your delivery lead, your team lead to collaborate with the business and get some people to test your services through their applications. Imagine if something breaks and they cannot do anything, and it takes half a day to a day to fix it. And you're not impacting one team, we're impacting probably 5 business teams that are working towards a release just because one service broke. But that service is using a main component in the back end, so they cannot get a letter. They cannot get a check, or they cannot get the data transported or transmitted from one database to another. So therefore, it's not reflected a change on our online application. So basically, those behavior-driven development scenarios are the key source of our requirements. We can trace those scenarios as part of our business requirements. In integration, most of our business requirements are also DevOps, support, monitoring, compliance requirements. We can do exploratory testing quickly with tools like SOAP UI, if needed, or quick messaging tools, Hermes or something like that, just to verify, is this service up? Am I getting a good response? No connectivity issues? Done. Shakedown, done. Defect management. It's easier to track if you know where to look and how to look for it. It's easy when you know what is the issue and you talk to the right people, it's easier to know what's the impact of the issue. And if it's a defect or a cosmetic thing that no one cares really, and it's not impacting anyone, it's just looking ugly on the back end, but nobody knows. Does it really impact a release? Or is it just for having a clean, tidy output? Any outstanding defects I put here Racing QC because it's not a commercial. It's just the tool that we use. But in general, it's very useful to use tools to to manage your defects. Why? Because you get a better assessment of the number of defects. When did you first register them? You can, if you are dependent on fixes from other teams, databases, infrastructure, security certificates, anything, it's easier to escalate, it's easier to document, it's easier to retest. When you have everything written down and you don't have as a tester, sometimes we don't have the power or we don't have the time to go and chase everybody. Have you done this? Developer A, have you done that? Have you done that? Not really. Am I sending an email? How many emails have I sent? Is anybody really looking at the emails? Am I getting a response or just, yeah, in a month's time I'll probably get a response from developer A, but they already forgot about it. Do I need to go every week and say, hey, have you looked at my email? Not really. But if you talk to that person, he might not even look through his emails in a day or 2 or a week. But he might be very friendly and say, hey, yeah, I'll fix it in 5 minutes. Just sit with me here. Let's go after lunch. Sit down. Okay, tell me what is it supposed to do. Let's go. Okay, let's test it quickly here. And it can be fixed probably in an hour or 30 minutes. Probably a little bit longer than that. But people are usually very accommodating when they know what you're looking for, when you know how to explain what you want as well and what you need. And that's one of the best benefits that I found with this approach, that you get to understand what you need, who needs it, and why it's needed. And just go through our test cycle as usual, but use your behavior specifications to drive your risk assessment, to drive your test cases, to drive your strategy. Sometimes you don't know the strategy from the beginning or the list of test plans or different types of test plans that you need to write. Because it might be just functional. It might be functional and non-functional. It might be just moving to a data center, so it's really a non-functional. Or do you need specific circumstances that you need to collaborate with different teams? A lot of that gets fleshed when you know what is the change or what are you developing. When you implement the behaviors, you get to know that people are actually working on the change or in the service. You get to record it and show them what you're expected or what you're expecting from a result versus what you are getting. And they usually are very visual. I'm very visual myself. For me, a picture tells me more than 1,000 words. And I know I'm talking too much here, but it's easier sometimes to have a screenshot with a big red circle on a screen saying, hey, this is wrong, than just write, this field is wrong because the length of the characters, blah, blah, blah. It's better to be very visual, and then you can learn how to communicate with a team, with a person, or with a different personalities in your team so that you can get the best out of it, a more effective communication. And it's usually very, very smooth sailing after that. Once you get to click with your team or with the different teams, you know where to go, how to reach them. And it's just a matter of getting the times or the time to collaborate together in your calendar. Usually people are very busy these days, and there are a lot of meetings. I don't know if most of you have experienced that. Sometimes are days that you have half a day of meetings, and you haven't had any time to do anything because you're going through walkthroughs of design, of documentation. You're going through whatever the developer is trying to say, whatever the BA is trying to write, whatever the business is telling me to test. Am I actually understanding? Once you get a defect tested or fixed, more or less fixed, when you get that defect done, and it's coming back to you. Do you remember how did you test it if you didn't document it properly? Do you remember which was it, which environment, which test account, which data? What was exactly the issue? Is it descriptive enough? Can someone else do it? If we have that mentality and doing our best so that someone else can pick it up and do it, that means that we're doing something right. That is easy enough to be done and easy enough to understand. And then you can test it or retest it very easily without impacting a full regression suite. Because you know exactly what the impact is, exactly where the issue is, and you know what or where is impacting to the business, which application probably, which functionality. Or you know, yeah, it's just that screen, that button, or that UI component that is not rendering properly. Or is it just a test issue? When trying to keep up with the automation, with our automated suites, how many times we go through the pain of, geez, this was running and it was perfect last release, last week, 2 weeks ago. Now it's half of them breaking. Do I have enough time to go to 500 tests and say, 100 tests and yeah, it's a database issue. How do I know? Am I logging the right information in my automation? Do I know where is it running? With which accounts? Which database? What is the input and the output that I'm getting? If someone else is writing the test code, are we actually getting someone to review that the test is right? Are we, as the devs are doing unit tests, are we doing test reviews? Are we pairing up with somebody or a BA to say, hey, can you have a look and tell me, is this what you mean? To verify that we're doing the right things. That's very useful. It's better to do it before you actually deliver to an acceptance phase or UAT, but sometimes you only get to know the issues around business behaviors at the end, because that's when you're interfacing with the real business people. But if you work together from the lower end, in the bottom of the pyramid, then you know exactly what is expected. And then you get to produce your reports. You're ready to assess. You're ready to produce a risk report. You're ready to produce recommendations around what to do, how not to do it. Are we ready to actually deploy it? Do we have any dependencies with teams or with security or with third parties? Do we know that other projects are onboarding after us, but we're dependent on their things? We are servicing them, but they're also servicing us. Is there something that we need to know that we don't know about yet before actually highlighting that risk? Who's going to sign off? If you are responsible for signing off as a test lead or a test manager, then you need to know those things because you're going to be accountable. The team lead or a CIO or the operational manager will come to you and say, hey, what does this mean? What is the risk? What is the impact? If I release this into production, what does it mean if something breaks? Who is going to support it? How many FTEs do I have to have on Monday to pick up the queue of errors that it's going to produce if this doesn't get fixed? Are we ready to provide those answers? And sometimes those things can be fleshed out from your behaviors because you understand where is the impact, or at least what is the symptom. Based on the symptoms, you can go back and ask, can you test it again? Is this something you sent? Or is this something that I'm producing? Can I test it in a lower environment and verify that this is something that, based on contract, on agreements, on requirements that are documented across the organization, the systems, blah, blah, blah. You verify with not only one stakeholder, but others. Because you don't service one, you service many systems. And that's the challenge in integration. You have to be like a mediator of accommodate everybody with a minimum risk and a minimum impact. Any questions?
So with that last diagram, were you saying that's agile?
So it looks very waterfall.
That's a bit, yeah.
But in integration, that's one of the challenges that we struggle with. In most of the organizations and the different consultants that we engaged, or that I've worked with in different organizations, none of them practice agile in integration governance and integration delivery. None of them. IBM, very much waterfall. eBlueprint, very much waterfall. And why is that? It's because of that level of technical specifications, that level of preparation or pre-work that you need to do to understand who is talking to me as a stakeholder, what are my technologies, and am I ready to do this, or do I need to be in baby steps and my first rollout phase will be 3 months, and the next step will take me 6 months, or another month? Do I have enough time, or do I have a deadline? Do I have a deadline because of legislation, because of financial position, because of marketing position? Because I got the management layer saying, we've promised the client and we need to do this. Okay, so let's assess what we can do. How can we do it in the best possible way, with a less impact, and having the conversations that you need at the right time. So there are a lot of things that when you write your test plan or your behavior specifications, at the same time you're writing your design specification as an architect, as an integration designer, integration developer. As a technical delivery lead, you know who to engage as stakeholders. So if I am a delivery lead, I need to know who is going to manage this platform, that platform, those databases. Am I talking to a gateway? Am I talking to the cloud system? Is this a SaaS? Is this something that I need? Do I have a policy in place for that or not? Do I even know about it? Most of the time we don't. We're in the middle. We're not ahead, and we're not in the back end. We talk to back end, we front face. By the time it reaches us, it's like, oh, we need to be prepared. And that's why it takes a lot of time. That's why we try to slice our stories based on, it looks very much like Kanban at some point, but we slice our stories based on pre-work requirements. We have a governance set of tasks, and we know what is the most do's for any deliverable on analysis, on wikis, on standards around what is my information that I need to provide, where is my inputs by outputs, who do I need to talk to, who's responsible of asserting that all those data fields or databases mean the source of truth for connecting this system to that system, and so that I get the same flavor or the same amount everywhere.
Do you think this kind of work, you mentioned the pre-work, should include even the contracts?
Yes.
Technically speaking, writing, contract-based testing, including database checking,
Yep.
sort of things. So before a single line of development code is written, have these contracts testing in place and run them or fail, and then run them again and again. So that's your point here.
So a lot of the things that we do is we work with developers and DBAs, and we get some of our technical BAs to write the specification, the contract specification for stored procedures, for example. So the database connection will change. The stored procedure name won't change. The data fields expected and the data type values won't change. I'm trusting that the stored procedure is being built by DBAs that know what they're doing, and I know that the business or the service team have provided the requirements around the service contract. There's a database team and there's a data management team that will own the data. They will be responsible of making sure that that data is consistent across everything. But if you don't have that, or it's a mix and match of, yeah, it's my DBA, but kind of knows here and there, and we don't have really an architect, or it's very hard to get the correct architects in place, or get a formal sign-off, then we work with them. And sometimes, yes, you need to sit down with them and say, can you please write a formal email just to say, yep, you're happy with it. If you're happy with it, no problems. We can write the XSD for you. We can write the stored procedure for you. if you're going to sign it off, or I'll send you the list of data fields that need to be produced, and this is the mock contract for a stored procedure that we're expecting. Can you please deliver it? We can start development. Then your tests are at a component layer. You haven't stopped working. You have done design. You have done documentation. You have done contract-based approach. You have done error handler. Once you move to the next phase, DBAs, this is your stored procedure, your functional side of things or your business logic that isn't isolated in that layer, you can test it now. Then you run another set of tests. You don't need to test everything you did before because that's also ensure that it's already there. You are moving to the next level of the pyramid. And then once you're sure that that is done, then you have your major business rules around, what is your business? What is your process? Is everybody connecting and seeing the same? Is it all good? Then you might have occasional errors with application A, B, or C around, I'm sending this and I'm getting that error, or I'm getting a timeout. Just, oops, sorry, our SLAs are, the standard is this much. If you're expecting that in 3 seconds, the backend systems don't support that. So if you add the timeouts or the SLA from one backend system to another and then it reaches to you, by the time you deliver to the next phase, it might time out. So that needs to be added into consideration with non-functionals. Around load and stress. Load is very important around, who is using this? One application, 2 applications, how many business units, how many things are being processed in the backend and going through my service layer. If it's one that I know about, how many are they? Can I track them? Can I know my volumes? Do I have peak times? So those kind of things can drive earlier your design really and your work. So but by the time you get the fluffiness out of it, you're actually delivering value at the right point, and you're trying to ease the pain for everybody and get to ramp up your team as quickly as possible. So yes, it's very much it's fragile. It's not really agile in a lot of ways, but at the same time, we try to do parallel things so that we can accommodate requirements and skill sets across the team and across the organization. Sorry, another question? I spoke too much. No? Yes.
Hey, do you reckon in which state we have to use penetration testing?
So penetration testing, usually my experience is we get specialist consultants, but we get the assessment, or we do the assessment around volumes ourselves, about stress and load, around peaks and shakedowns. So what it means is that, is there a way of easily track down your SLAs in a test environment? And how different is your test environment from the actual production?
I'm asking in your module, if you use, which state are you going to introduce?
I would be part of your execution. So you can have your implementation, your test, implementation behavior specifications, and in there you would have a behavior that it should support this much load during that time. Because then you stress databases and also the backend systems, not only. It's useful when you're actually in an integrated environment, because actually you're measuring not only your integration layer or your service, but the backend systems that they are capable or actually committing to that load. And sometimes the expectation from a UI or business unit is one thing, but really the reality is our infrastructure in the organization may not carry it or may need a lot of power to it. So yes, we can do it, but we need another CPU in the environment. We need another RAM. We need another server. We need VMs. What about DR? What are your requirements? Thanks. Any other question?
Yes, I guess often integration is something that is a bit of an afterthought in the development process, and when it is thought of, often it's sort of like the rule police, right? They deal with the service contracts and whatnot. I know you've done some work in this. Like, how can you kind of raise the department's profile? They're there to help solve problems and engage, your consumers earlier.
So that's a tough question. When depends on what is the maturity of your integration in your organization? Do you have a team? Do you have a provider? Do you have a center of excellence that provides that? Or are you maturing into that center of excellence? Are you bringing a governance framework, or are you developing the governance framework? And most of the time it's a hybrid. You need to learn from the experts, but at the same time, not everything fits. Not everything is fit for purpose. You need to adapt. You need to adjust. You need to mature. And one of the challenges is everybody to get on board with the cultural change. Everybody to actually commit to the tasks. Because a lot of the times we say a story is done. How many of us go and review that? Yes, I've actually done that deliverable. That file that is supposed to be stored there because I said that I did it. How many of us are taking a story to done without actually going through all the acceptance criteria and make sure there's a deliverable for each acceptance criteria? That is the challenging part around governance, because all of your success is based on a pre-thought, a deliverable, and most of it is really an output. Because someone else at some point will pick it up. They need to know how it works. Do you need to release a next version of service? How did we do that in the first place? Where did we get this information? That's one of the challenges that I've seen. Once you get to know your dynamics and who are your SMEs in your organization, and you get the support, it's very important to get the support from your IT area and from your business area. If you don't have that support from the top management, it's really hard to actually get budget first. Well, it's one of the challenges. Assess and estimate your work, because it takes a long time, and a lot of teams or project managers or delivery leads in Agile, Scrum Masters will tell you, give me an estimate in 5, 8, 13, 20, 100, 40, whatever. Can you do that in integration? When you have all this documentation or all these thoughts, all these people to meet and get actually something formalized. So we had to develop and work towards an estimation process that we actually started 4 years ago and revisited constantly based on timesheets. Based on that, we modeled estimation points, t-shirt sizes versus cost and timelines. And having a profile roughly of one integration developer, one technical business analyst or technical analyst, solution analyst, one test analyst, one automation analyst or automation engineer. At least those 4 people should be involved. Wait. Yes?
So you mentioned writing behavior specification test and implement that. So where do you store that and what would you use to do that?
So the idea that we have in our team behind behavior-driven features or your scenarios is store that as a feature. If you're working towards a service, where's the function of that service? Updating, creating, initiating. Then we used a service version control system. We use TFS, and we just keep it as a feature file in SpecFlow. We use .NET and SpecFlow.
So when you say feature file, are you using Gherkin?
Yes, we use Gherkin language, and technically we automate that or we do manual steps, but ideally is that you can understand, for a manual tester, you can understand a behavior and produce a test case based on that, and you can actually put the steps of what is meant to be doing each Gherkin statement, so that when the automation engineer or the technical tester will come in and a developer will come in, will pick up that behavior spec and that scenario and say, yeah, you mean by this, you mean this and that, this is a test case. Yes, I mean this. Okay, now I know what you mean. So everybody understands what are the steps. The idea is that you understand the steps from a scenario or Gherkin perspective to actually implement it. And we put the automation scenarios as well as the manual ones in the same feature file, because it's a behavior of your service as your requirements. They don't change if they're implemented or not. If they're out of scope or not, they were originally in scope. If you have a defect, it's based on a requirement. And the only way to pick it up is through a test case or through a behavior-driven specification. That makes it easier. So that when you create a test coverage matrix or do your analysis, you can actually target the right level of testing. Is this a unit one? Is this a service contract? Is this an error handler? Is this a database-oriented one? Am I talking about security here or just load profiles? Different types of testing can be added to your scenarios as long as you can identify them easier. Because then you can understand immediately when you read those scenarios, we're talking about the service contract. We're talking about data. We're talking about business process. Do I need to go and talk to the business, or do I need to talk to a DBA because I'm having problems with a store procedure or with a web service in the back end? Did I answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions? No. Thank you so much for your participation and your company today. And thank you for putting up with my long chat. Thanks. Thank you.